I'll pass it to you, Case, since you sort of have a presentation, and I'll let you go ahead and take it from here. Go ahead, Case.
Yeah, we got a lot of work to do. So if you could bring up the slide, I don't know if there we go.
Absolutely,
all right.
Yes.
So we're going to be talking about labor strategies and all the different strategies. A lot of labor strategies. If you follow RBN and other resources, you're going to be familiar with a lot of these. And also, Deena, anytime anything pops up that you really want to talk about, just go ahead and jump in. So I learned because I'm not a unionized worker. I wanted to do some research, and for this summit, I got this book, and I found it was an excellent book, and that's where a lot of the notes that I'm going to be talking about comes from. So I definitely recommend people to check this book out. So here are some labor tactics: collective bargaining. Unions negotiate with employers on behalf of their members to secure better wages, working conditions, and benefits. This can involve direct negotiations, mediations, or even strikes if an agreement cannot be reached, which brings us to strikes. Strikes are a common tactic used by unions to put pressure on employers. During a strike, workers refuse to work until their demands are met. Strikes can be temporary, such as a one-day walkout, or they can last a few weeks. Now, the benefits of a strike and collective bargaining is that all the workers individually, they might not have enough power. They don't have enough power to say, hey, I'm getting $16 an hour. I want $20 an hour because the cost of living is going up. So that's where the power comes from. And I just want to show this small clip. It wouldn't be right, me being K-Study QB, to not show a clip, right? So here we go.
But I can't escape the tribal nature of Hollywood. They don't look at themselves as individuals. So they're not willing to individually negotiate their contracts based on their worth and what to provide into the table. They're asking for all of them to be on the same playing field when they're not doing the same amount of work or have the same fan base. And I think that's what is going to destroy them at the end of the day.
That's not what's going to destroy them. That's what's going to give them more power. So this is why I do what I do with showing the mainstream media and highlighting the propaganda that they display. He's trying to convince you, no, you as the individual should go to your boss and individually say, I want a raise. Instead of what in reference to what he's talking about is the Hollywood strike, where all the regular workers are coming out and they're saying, hey, we need to collectively ask for a raise. That's really where the power comes from. So don't fall for Lawrence Jones with this. All right, so let's continue. Picketing. Picketing involves workers demonstrating outside the workplace to raise awareness about their grievances. Picketing can involve signs, chants, and other forms of peaceful protest. And this is where I want to bring in Deena, because I know, what was it, last week or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, that you were actually picketing. You told me about that, and you mentioned this person here, Scabby the Rat. And in the chat, I want anybody to let me know. I'm familiar with Scabby because I'm in New York, so I've seen Scabby. In the chat, let me know if you live outside of New York and you've seen Scabby before. But Deena, please talk to us.
Yeah, so when you are on strike, you're always going to have a picket line during work hours that will involve a lot of walking around in a circle, which kind of can like put you in a time warp of like, you kind of lose track of time. So you do have to like take breaks. You break the walking up with things like rallies, singing songs. You eat lunch. There's always going to be like a food committee that's making sure there's food for everybody. I was the head of the child care committee because I used to be a preschool teacher in case there were kids on the picket line that had come. Things like that. Yeah.
Nice. Awesome. So somebody like me, I've seen Scabby the Rat in New York before, and I didn't even know what a union was at the time or anything. It just stood out, and I was like, wow, something's going on. And for people who don't know, a scab is someone who would replace a unionized job. So you do not want to be a scab. And picketing lines are also good to intimidate scabs from entering the workplace, because the whole point of it is to raise the living standards for everybody, including people who might be scabs. I understand they just want to get some money to, for whatever reason, help their family out, but it's for a collective reasoning, not to have a race to the bottom, but a race to the top.
Yeah, and picket lines can be incredibly powerful even with just a few members. So with the writers' strike, actually in New York, there were 3 writers who were picketing. And basically they were able to shut down the entire production because the Teamsters wouldn't cross the picket line. And so they didn't need every single person to be on strike. All they needed were 3 people to be on a picket line, so that everybody knew, like, don't scab, don't cross.
Yeah, 100%. Now, I saw someone said that my mic is low. I'm going to try to fix that as we go on. But until then, I'll talk a little louder as much as I can. Okay, so here's some other things. Work slowdowns. Some unions engage in work slowdowns or slowdown strikes as a tactic to put pressure on employers. This involves worker intentionally reducing their productivity or following work rules very strictly, which can disrupt operations and put financial pressure on the employers. So something that I've seen recently, something called quiet quitting, that I've heard on TikTok. They've been doing some quiet quitting. Yeah, which is similar to this, but and we'll talk about that later because I do have that coming up soon. All right. Boycotts. Unions.
Could I just say something else about the work slowdown? So that's actually a really good tactic if you live in a right to work state or if you're a public sector union member, because when you're a public sector union member, legally you're not allowed to strike. And then in right to work states also, like, you can get in trouble for that. So if you're not willing to take what is really a big risk to do a wildcat, work slowdowns, or what's called work to rule, which is where you only do exactly what your contract says you need to do. Those can be tactics that you can use when a strike isn't an option, just so everyone knows.
Awesome. Definitely jump in.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, that you want to jump in. All right. Lobbying and political activism. Unions often engage in political activism and lobbying to advocate for legislation and policies that benefit workers. They may support or endorse political candidates who align with their interests and contribute to political campaigns. With that said, we all see what's going on in Congress and with lobbying. The rich, the elites, the owner class, they just have way too much money. So I wouldn't put a lot of stock or resources into this point. And definitely, Deena, I would want to get your opinion on this, because I think the real people power comes from everything we've talked about before: strikes, collective bargaining, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think it's sort of like, in a way, Congress is kind of like a middleman. So when you're doing when you're taking on, the capitalist class directly with unions and stuff like that, you're just cutting that out because the capitalist class and the corporations own Congress. So we want to lessen the power that those corporate interests have, and that will naturally trickle down to electoral politics.
Yeah.
Pun not intended, right?
No, not at all.
All right. Legal actions. Unions may take legal actions to protect workers' rights, such as filing lawsuits against employers for unfair labor practices and violations of labor laws. That's where the NLRB comes into play, the National Labor Relations Board, and that's one of the things that one of the disadvantage of this is, according to the president and their agenda, they can put in a bad NLRB. So even though you might have a grievance and it's a rightful grievance, if you have a corrupt NLRB in there, they can deny your case, right? And Deena, I don't know if you ever experienced anything with this or
personally, no, but yeah,
Okay.
that is a big problem.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's get into some radical actions. Oh, before that, information campaign. So that's what we're doing right here. We're having a labor summit today. And so this is an example of information campaign. Unions may use various communication channels such as newsletters, websites, and social media to inform and mobilize their members and the public about labor issues. This can include sharing stories or worker exploitation, organizing rallies or events, educating the public about the benefits of unionization. So that's something that even Workers Strike Back is doing a great job of trying to highlight all the different strikes that's going on. Sharma Sawant was on RBN's network recently talking about the rent control reform going on in Seattle. And definitely I want to bring in CJ if you have anything to add to this, since this is basically your staple.
Yeah, this is like information campaigns. This is what RBN, this is sort of our thing. We believe that these information campaigns, what we call streams, is what we do to mobilize people, to radicalize people, and that's what we try to do with the streams we have. So we very much know this particular part of organizing, which is information campaigns.
All right, so let's have some fun now. This is where we get to the fun stuff. Radical actions. All right. So radical actions, some things. Wildcat strike. That's exactly what Deena talked about earlier, which is a hard thing. I understand is a very hard thing. Basically, a wildcat strike is an unauthorized strike that is not sanctioned or organized by union leadership. These strikes occur when workers take spontaneous actions without going through the proper channels or follow the establishment strike procedures of their union. And unfortunately, there's times that the union leadership is weak, or they could be straight up corrupt, where they're working on behalf of the owners and the elite class. They're in cahoots with them. And sometimes it's needed to have a wildcat strike. So in preparation for this workshop, I didn't know that one of the biggest wildcat strikes was the Great Postal Strike of 1970. So I'm going to touch on this real quick in regards to the wild strike. And basically the strike began in New York City and spread to some other cities in the following 2 weeks. This strike against the federal government, regarded as illegal, was the largest wildcat strike in U.S. history. Ultimately, 210,000 people were involved. It spread to 30 cities. Of the nation's 750,000 postal employees participated in this wildcat strike. And then the last thing is, with mail service virtually paralyzed in New York, Detroit, and Philadelphia, President Nixon declared a state of a national emergency and assigned military units to basically to New York City Postal Office to try to do the work of the strikers. But there's no way you could train somebody up that quickly and get them involved. So that's where the pressure comes in to get change. So I mentioned this. Here's a picture of that situation. And then here, the impact, the ultimate impact was the strike crippled the national mail system and the stock market fell. So that's where a lot of the pressure was put on. So what was the result? They finally won a 6% raise. Then President Nixon felt pressure from the postal workers to collectively bargain for a better salary, which pressured President Nixon to sign the Postal Reorganization Act to create the new U.S. Postal Service, in which post workers were able to gain an additional. So you had the 6% raise, and then they gained an additional 8% raise increase. So that's, a wildcat strike, even though it's scary and it's hard, I found that you got the most concessions and the most amount of change by doing that particular radical action.
And let me explain why that is, or is my belief why that is, because anytime you have the worker directly negotiating for themselves, you're going to get more instead of a representative like in the UPS situation, especially today's union, whereas the leadership is all about keeping things calm. It's all about keeping things calm and all about quelling strikes. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. All right, so here's another radical action, and I'm going to bring in Deena for the next two actions. The first one is salting, and this is something I learned from a union organizer. Basically, it's infiltrating a workplace that's not already organized, that doesn't already have a union, and you infiltrate it by applying to work there, get a job. Once you get the lay of the land, you kind of find out who are the people that have influence at the job, and you try to convince them, say, hey, I think we should get a union. And we'll talk about how to try to galvanize and build a union from within later in the workshop. But it's almost like it's the opposite of what COINTELPRO was. COINTELPRO was sent infiltrators into the Black Panthers, into the civil rights movements, and they would gather information and give it to the FBI. This is unions sending in workers to gather information about particular workplace and bring the information back so they can learn how to unionize that particular position. Is there anything you want to add, Deena?
Yeah, I mean, salting is one of the most badass things you can do. It's also incredibly difficult because you basically have 2 full-time jobs at the same time. But yeah, no, like for example, the Starbucks union started with a bunch of salts.
Okay, I did not know that.
Yeah, and not even like established union organizers going in, just people who had organizing experience. So
Nice.
it can be successful, but it's really hard. So just be prepared for that.
That brings us to the next one, which is peppering, which I found this out from Deena, so I'm definitely gonna have you come in and talk about that. But basically, peppering is when a union already is established at a particular place, but maybe it's not a strong union, it's a weak union, and it needs to be more radicalized. Tell us about peppering, Deena.
Yeah, so one thing you can do when you're peppering, it might already exist or you might have to create it, but I don't know if people have heard about like different reform caucuses within unions.
Yes.
So that's already happened at the Teamsters and my union, UAW. You're seeing now even a caucus at the Amazon labor union that's trying to get elections for leadership because they haven't had any elections yet. And that can be really powerful. It's basically a caucus isn't anything superficial. It's just a group of people coming together around a certain goal. For example, I'm part of Unite All Workers for Democracy, which is UAWD. That's the Reform Caucus in UAW. I pay $2 a month in dues. It's not a lot. And you just, do organizing. One of the things that the caucus was able to get before any leadership out of the caucus was elected was just through pressure and organizing, mobilizing members. They were able to lift, so strike pay under the old super corrupt president was $250 a week. And so they were able to raise it to $400 and then to $500. And that was without electing anybody new. That was just the caucus doing that work of organizing. Wow. So it really does, it works kind of like electoral politics does. You have the inside game, you have the outside game. It is important, though, once people from the caucus or associated with the caucus are elected into leadership, for that caucus not to sort of become like, for that caucus to keep holding those people accountable. So we're seeing that right now with the Teamsters and Sean O'Brien and the tentative agreement that some Teamsters are not super happy with.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about that. We're completely against this, and we're advocating for Teamsters to vote against it. But I do have a question for Deena. Just a couple of things that you've said has given me a cue or given me a hint that, are you a socialist or a communist by chance?
Yeah.
You are. Okay. So do you find that a lot of the people that are sort of in this organizing space either are radicalized to be, to lean socialist, communist, or they are already socialist, communists, and that's the reason why they're sort of doing this work? Maybe you can answer it for yourself. Like, how did it happen with you? And then if you can speak to anyone else.
For me, I think it's always been sort of intertwined. The more left I've gone, the more I get involved with the labor movement. Generally with the reform caucuses, I think a lot a significant portion of those people are people who would identify as socialists or democratic socialists of some kind. Especially with unions like UAW, at least in my experience, like the caucus doesn't call itself socialist. And like someone could start another caucus that's like, a anarcho-communist caucus. Like those can exist. And I think there's even one in the Teamsters, but I'm not sure. So yeah, I think generally the at least especially among young people, I would say, and like almost any young people who are involved in the labor movement are going to be pretty open to socialism or communism or anything like that.
Oh, that's awesome. But that's just a hunch that I had. It is at the halfway mark, so I didn't know if we wanted to give Deena the opportunity now. I know you had to take off and get to some organizing or get to some work. So, but go ahead.
If you have any last words, Deena. If you have any last words, then you could jump out, Deena.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you are already in a union, definitely see if there's a caucus, like a reform caucus or a Democratic caucus or a socialist caucus that you can join, or you can start your own. And also, like, there's a lot of workshops, labor notes workshops. They have a bunch. There's like what to do when your union breaks your heart. They have ones on like bargaining and all that kind of stuff. They're really good. I think Jane McAlevey, who that book that Case was talking about, she's involved with all those workshops too. So those are great resources if you really want like hands-on practical information.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. Your knowledge was valuable in this workshop. So you have a good rest of your day, buddy.
Yeah, you too. Take care. Solidarity.
And I'll put you right there in the back there. Thank you so much. She was great. Yeah. I could just hear in some of the things she said that there was some of a socialist leaning, especially when she mentioned capitalists going after the capitalist class. That's just not how a typical worker who is not leaning socialist speaks. But go ahead, sir, with your presentation.
Yeah, what you guys, your conversation with her made me think of was a part of the same book that I mentioned at the beginning, and how union leaders would use the leftists in the union because they were the best at organizing the workforce, and they would use them to get concessions and to get some certain things done. And then when they accomplished that concession and they got what they want, the union leader would kick out the leftists. It would do as much as they can to stifle them. And I was like, wow, like definitely check out that book. There's a lot of great information in there, lessons to be learned, so that when we start to build back up the labor union strength in this country, we want to learn from the past so we don't repeat it in the future. All right, let's continue on. So this part is just, we're going to get creative together. Everybody in the chat, if you have any ideas, we're going to throw it out there. But something that I was thinking about is a digital boycott. And by the way, I increased my mic, so hopefully I'm not too loud now. But let me.
No, you sound perfect. I didn't think you were that low earlier, but it has. I do notice an increase, and it sounds clear, so you're good.
Beautiful, beautiful. A digital boycott. Now, this hasn't necessarily happened yet. I did hear one of the Hollywood strikers talking about it, saying like, "Hey, we don't need to do a boycott of Netflix or this yet. We haven't come to that point yet." So he's like kind of hinting towards Netflix and everybody else, like, "Hey, this could be coming down the pike." But I think it would be interesting if you had a big celebrity like a Ben Affleck, who I've heard people complaining that he hasn't been on a picking line. But if he decides to show up, let's say we have the big celebrities come out.
Ben Affleck has not been on the picket line.
He has not been on a picking line. I saw a sign.
That's surprising.
There was a sign that said, "Hey, where is Ben Affleck?" Literally, somebody was on the picket line with the big sign that says, "Where is Ben Affleck?" Right? But like all the big celebrity actors, if they came out and said, "Hey, on this day, let's just say August 30th, we are encouraging people who have solidarity with us to freeze your Netflix or cancel your Netflix membership." I would say, if I was going to be even more strategic, I would say towards the end of a quarter, every there's the parts of a
Business
quarter.
quarters, yes. They have
Business
to
quarters,
report to their
exactly.
shareholders.
To shareholders and things like that. They like to boast, oh, we have 5 million new members, and then their stock goes up. Well, wait till it's like a week or a couple of days before one of those and say, hey, we're going to have a strike, so that you're going to have millions of people drop out, and they're going to have to report that. And then their stock is going to go down. And I think that's a way that we could put a lot of pressure on these establishments. All right, let's move on. Quiet quitting. So we talked about this earlier. Quiet quitting is something that went viral on the internet. And I want to show, do I have it here? Oh man, I thought I had it queued up, but maybe I'll bring it up a little later when I find it. But quiet quitting is when the workers are still working, but they're not going above and beyond. So it's kind of similar to before we talked about that worker slowdown. And then loud quitting is when, and I'm going to see if I can find an example of that, when workers loudly say like, hey, I'm quitting. This place sucks. I'm leaving. Right?
We've seen several like viral examples of that on like Walmart. You'll see a Walmart worker get on the mic on the PA system and say this job sucks. Blah blah blah. So yes, that's loud quitting. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's wild quitting, and I'm gonna bring it up randomly later. But all right. So what else we got here? So let's finally, as we wrap up the workshop, I'm going to talk about some things to do if you are at a location that you would like to try to help unionize that location. This is again a source from Jane McAlevey. And the first thing is introduction and to frame the conversations. Introduce yourself, be confident, and set the context for the conversation that relates to the specific situation for your particular group. So, overall we say, hey, yeah, we need more wages. We need more healthcare. But find out what the specific need for your particular job is. Maybe it's a safety issue. Maybe you need more PPE, like a mask and different things for your particular job. So find out where the heart of the angst is and try to focus on that. Issues and agitation. Figure out what issues are important to the workers through an open-ended question and about that work. So that's very similar to what I just said. So for example, if you could change 3 things at your work tomorrow, what would you change? So that's literally a question that you can be asking the different workers and hearing their feedback so that you can use that as a focus. Okay, hope and our vision and education. This is about raising workers' expectations and communicating the idea that in order to win significant gains, workers need to get a stronger voice. They need to build high membership in their work site, active participation by building site structures, involve members of the community, and join with other members in the fight. A lot of time, and I know CJ and I've heard this talked about on RBN, where you have professional managerial class type of people, elitist kind of people who come in and they think they know what's best for the workers. Well, this is talking about the workers having their own destiny and discussing what they need instead of having it from on high. People come in and tell you what you need. All right. Urgency. Ask the workers if we can wait for the kinds of changes needed or if management will do anything if they are not pushed. So that's a good way of motivation, is to say, hey, somebody just died in this meat packing industry because a whole bunch of boxes fell on their head. We need to make changes and we need it now because we don't want somebody else to die. So that's the type of urgency that we need. You can make the difference and basically make sure you have a concrete ask and wait for their response. So like a regular worker, don't try to lead the witness. Make sure they feel like the solution is coming from them. So you would ask that question. And even if you have to stand there and just wait a minute or two in just silence for them to think and articulate what they have to say, that's worth it because you want it to be coming from the workers themselves. All right. And the last thing, inoculation. This is just what it sounds like. You give the worker a little bit of poison, they will hear from management by joining their union or participation in their union action. So this is basically saying, talk to them about what they can possibly hear from management. So management is going to threaten them with, hey, if you guys join a union, we're going to have to let go of half the workforce, or whatever else. What other scare tactics they're gonna have? You want to kind of prep them before they can hear it from the management, so they're not as anxious or they're not as scared because they already know about these threats from you. All right, and that's the end. So we want to make sure we take action, and I'm gonna let CJ talk while I'll try to find this clip that I wanted to bring up.
Absolutely. So, case study starts off all of our summits with an informational sort of laying the groundwork, definition, sort of terminology, and that's what he's doing here, giving us the terminology for labor organizing, giving us sort of the tactics for labor organizing, and also giving us some sort of inspiration for labor organizing. Now, later today, and maybe in an hour or so, Zoya is going to be talking about, so you can kind of pair what case study is saying here with what Zoya is going to be talking about. And that's literally, she's going to be going through the steps on how to start a union at your workplace. So she's going to be covering that. Just remember what he's talking about here for the next presentation, which is actually coming up in about 30, 40 minutes or so. Go ahead.
So this is the clip there that I thought I had it queued, but let me show it.
Who am I? What am I to you? If I open your store every day and then you treat me like this.
Shame on y'all for treating your associates the way you do. I hope you can speak to your families the way you speak to us. Manage it and this job. I quit. Because I just don't think that this job is for me. So I am quitting. You have been awesome. Everyone has been awesome.
Okay, so this is a new trend, Robert. What's your reaction to some employees? They get so fed up with their.
So let's hear from.
I love it. I love it.
While we still got some time, I want to hear from this elitist what he's going to say, how he feels about loud quitting.
Bosses, rather than quiet quitting, where they just go to their job every day but they don't really do anything, they're turning to social media now to quit in a much more vocal and viral way. Is this okay?
I think it's dumb and it's short-sighted. Most people stay in the same industry and or profession. They often are asked from their prior employer for a reference or get called without knowing that they're asking for the reference. And it doesn't make sense to me. I think that they'll go back and see how using social media to give their views, I just think is very short-sighted. And they should move on in the most professional way.
Yeah, publicly undermining your company. Many HR executives are saying you might want to think twice about that. Dan?
Yeah, I think Robert is giving this.
Sandra, we used to say, sorry.
No, go, Robert.
We used to say the house is bigger than the man many years ago on Wall Street. And, you know, if you kind of, you know, try to really take down, you know, a large company, it seldom does that help you in your career.
Just real quick to what, Robert, I think we're giving this too much credence. This is a bunch of 20.
All right, we can stop it at that point, but yeah. We can see how they feel.
They're pretty mad. They're pretty mad. Go ahead.
they're definitely mad about that. So the only thing I would say, so they're doing these actions individually and it's going viral, and I think is a great way to motivate other people to say, hey, it's not just me. There's people out there that might feel like they're alone and it's just them that they have to deal with the job making. I mean, we still have a minimum wage of $7.25 is insane to me that we can't increase that. And if we can find a way to collectively have people, what if that last person at that call, she was on a Zoom call, got all her other coworkers on that same Zoom call to say, I'm quitting. The next person say, I'm quitting. The next person say, I'm quitting. Now, the employee, either they have to go out and train a whole new workforce, which is going to leave their business in flux, or they can say, hey, all right, somebody talk to me and find out what do we need to do to change? Do you guys want to raise? And we saw a little hint of that when Elon Musk came and bought Twitter, and he let go a ton of people. And then he found out, I let go a little bit too many people. He was like, I got to bring people back on. So if I got invited, if that was me, I was working for Twitter, got fired, and then they want to hire me back, I say, hey, you got to pay me twice the salary that I was making.
Yeah,
before.
You got to pay me more money.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, man. Much love to you, CJ. Much love to the chat. I see all my usual people. World Program. Much love. Go ahead, CJ.
No. What I was gonna say is when I did a segment on, was it quiet quitting? What was it called when it was people were, it was like in the millions, like 4 million people quitting, 4 million people quitting. I can't remember what it was.
You know
but
what?
anyway, when I was covering it, I saw a
ahead.
lot of clips like this. I
Yeah.
saw a lot of clips like the ones that we're talking about, where it was always from the corporation's point of view. You rarely see them
Exactly.
interviewing workers, like
Yeah.
almost never see them interviewing workers. But go ahead if you have another clip you wanted to play.
It's funny you said that. So this clip is from October 13, 2021. And it talks about exactly what you just said. So let me play it.
Quitting their jobs has surged to record highs. According to new data released by the Labor Department, some 4.3 million people quit in August. That number was driven largely by the food and retail industries. The previous record was set in April of this year, when about 4 million Americans walked off the job. Experts say this is being driven in part by workers who are less willing to endure inconvenient hours or poor compensation, or are seeking better opportunities. According to the Labor Department, there were about 10.4 million job openings in the United States at the end of August. A U.S. task.
All right. So, yeah, that's exactly what you were talking about, where a whole bunch of people were quitting because they were like, I'm not feeling this job anymore.
Yeah, and so to connect this or that particular point, so when we thought, oh, wages are going up, people are quitting, so they're having to, everybody starting out at $15 minimum wage, and then we thought, or maybe I shouldn't say we thought, but some people thought, oh, it's a win for workers. So that's how they, and then we had the Fed chair come in and start raising rates and start pushing for, because people need to understand recessions and these companies, you see these companies, 10,000 layoff, 20,000. You think they just woke up and said, you know what? We don't need 20,000 workers. Or are they trying to push the labor? Because if it's less people out of work, if it's more people out of work, more people looking for jobs, the wages go down. The wages are suppressed, and that's how they suppress wages. So they, so the $15 minimum wage offer, or the $15 wage that has been offered by a lot of companies since the pandemic really has been wiped away by inflation and the Fed raising interest rates. It really has been wiped away. So this is how the capitalist system works. You don't never think you're getting gains, and they're just gonna go, oh, let's let them have their gains. That's not how it's gonna work. They're gonna come after for that pilot of money. But did you have any other parts of your presentation?
That's basically everything. But one thing I want to say is, the Federal Reserve, there's a little known mandate that they are responsible for full employment. They are to push full employment, which means that everybody should have a job, or as many people to have a job. But we don't hear about that lately. We don't hear about that. We hear about them. They have a big hammer, which is to raise or lower interest rates. And in this case, they keep raising interest rates to try to get as many people. Their incentive is that the jobs, they don't want to borrow money at a low rate. So they want to cut jobs so that they could, so that they don't have to spend that money. And when the Federal Reserve raised the interest rates, they, like you just said it, CJ, it kicks a lot of people out of a job, and that's it. So what about if back in the day, in FDR's days, we have a lot of different issues with FDR, but he literally had a, I'm trying to think of the department was to create jobs. Wow, it slips my mind, but they basically were building bridges. They were doing art programs where they were paying people and making sure that people had jobs. This is coming out of the Great Depression. That's basically what it was. So what happens to that? We need a new department that their focus is to just create jobs. And it's not like we don't need it. We have Flint that don't have clean water. So we need to switch out all those pipes that are full with lead. And we need to, all across the country, we saw recently that they talked about how like 50% of America's water has forever chemicals in it. There's a lot of work to be done. We have bridges falling down. We have roads that need to be paved. We have new technology, fiber optic cables. We could fit all these different cities with free public internet. So there's so much work to be done, yet the government is not putting the money into these efforts. They're sending the money overseas into all the 800 bases that we have around the world, and basically wasting the money. So we can have everyone with better standards of living. We can have it. It's just a matter of a political will, or it's a matter of the people using their power to grab it by force, by a wildcat strike, by radical actions. And that's where we're going. With the workers' strike back, I'm optimistic that we're going and we're building that infrastructure, and continue watching RBN, continue paying attention to what our I was going to say enemies, but I feel like there's a better word for it. But in the mainstream media, that they propagandize us, that we're not together. Let's pay attention to them so we know what they're coming. That's why I like watching Morning Joe. It gives me that elite perspective that I'm not in their house. I'm not sitting at the table with rich people, but I kind of get a taste of what they're thinking by watching Morning Joe, by watching various mainstream media, and it's a good way to be vigilant. And thanks, CJ, for bringing me on so I could talk to the people, and hopefully we can galvanize to get this radical change coming in the future.